down there in a hole lived a bald guy that just loved Lord of the Rings. I mean, welcome everyone. I have my water with me. I might and like start with a little gulp of it because it's been rough. Welcome to another casual conversation with me, your friends. Your friends. I'll be there for you. Carlz, when I take my Spanish program and put it in kind of like questionable English words, this one is it was one of my favorites to record in Spanish, and I guess it might be one of my favorite to record in English as well. I'm finally talking about a subject that is dear to me, like one of the dearest topics ever for me, which is the world of J.R.R. Tolkien and the Lord of the Rings. But specifically, I'm gonna talk about the latest outing, like the big outing on the IP, which is of course Amazon's Rings of Power. I been a little bit, I don't know, not necessarily unsure, but let me, like, the disclaimers are back, and this is the way I measure everything. Like, you guys have no idea how much I love Lord of the Rings, but even though I love it so much, I'm not one of those big people that know even how, I don't know, the toilet paper that fucking Sauron used or anything. I don't know that much, but I know like the core elements of the plot in general. So whenever I see something related to the Legendarium or like the world of Tolkien, I have this sort of like, you could call it a spectrum of things, you know, because we know that the only lore, canonical lore, that this thing has are the books that Tolkien himself created. I even doubt to include whatever Christopher, his son, did later. He edited and published many of the things, including the Silmarillion, which is the most of the basis for this. So I have this spectrum when I think, okay, this canon, this lore is, it begins and ends with whatever Tolkien did, right? But I'm not so close-minded to think that nothing can be done after it. The point is, in this spectrum, you can add so many things, you can have so many stories, you can have so many characters, and the point is how much out of this spectrum you can move away, or more like farther away, before it stops making sense with the center, with the core, with the middle. To put like a weird example, I don't know, let's rewrite the Hobbit story, and I don't know, uh, Frodo is married or something like that. That would definitely change everything, and it would change the core. Another example, which is a more realistic one, is what they did with the games The Shadow of Mordor and The Shadow of War. I never played them because when I learned what they were about, this plot, these invented or created plots and characters, they went way too far out of this spectrum. Like this guy creating another One Ring, Celebrimbor being this sort of wraith, like, you know. So the point is, you can always create inside this spectrum. Some of these things you create are gonna go too far. Some of them are gonna be okay. So that's the way I see everything. So when I went into Rings of Power, I know that the Silmarillion and the segment for the Rings of Power that it's in the appendix of the books is short. I know that the Silmarillion is a point of contention because even though it's a great source of lore and it's a great source of everything basically in the Legendarium, it's super brief. It's brief. The characters are, sometimes they are barely mentions. So when you get into a series like that, like this one, your lore sensitivity does a weird thing. You want to accept a lot of things, but at the same time you're highly cautious, because since there's so little about this written in the books, in detail, what in details I mean, they are forced to create a lot of things, It's natural. They have to create a lot of things. So the danger is stronger when you see something like this. So this is gonna be full spoilers because I wanna have like full freedom, and as I did for my Spanish episode, I have written a general guide or a general thing, like a couple of things that I liked about each episode of both seasons. And I'm gonna go through them and gonna explain why I like them and why I feel like they don't break my own personal like big rule, which is don't leave the spectrum of the lore. Or if you are leaving it, kind of like you can still orbit it enough to be acceptable, For me, this is all under my own criteria. So, if we go straight into episode 1 of season 1, we have like the big, big, big thing that this show began with, and it was creating drama. Creating drama by having these characters and immediately turning them into a source of drama. This is this is something that Peter Jackson already did somehow, but he did something really brilliant where like even elves, well before the Hobbit movies, but even elves still retain this ethereal characteristic that they always had in Tolkien's work. The problem with this is that you can't write drama with elves as Tolkien wrote elves. You can't. So you immediately accept that. I immediately accept that these are gonna be conflicted characters. You can have classic Tolkien elves, the ones he wrote in The Hobbit, like oh yeah, we're dreaming with nature, willy lily lily. They were practically fairies. You can't have that and have more enjoyable and adult conflict and discussions. So immediately you have in episode 1 something that is conflicted but necessary, and ultimately it's enjoyable, especially with season's 1 protagonist, which is Galadriel. You have her having a lot of conflict, which I always thought that it was something that I would personally like Galadriel having or experiencing some strife and having some like drama, in her life. She lives like thousands of years, so it's really acceptable to show a part of her life, of her millennial life, probably a couple of hundreds of years out of that, where part of her life was consumed with vengeance with Sauron. It's acceptable. And the other thing that I liked, which is the other big story arc of season 1, is the creation of Mordor itself, which happens by the end of season 1. And I mentioned it in episode 1 because already in episode 1 you start seeing things that maybe if you had like a really smart insight or like a really smart brain, which I don't because I'm really dumb, maybe you saw it immediately. But if you were a regular person, you only saw humans living in Middle Earth having, I don't know how you call it, like temptation, being they are not straight up bad people, but they are living in a kingdom in disarray, like they're falling into some sort of dark magic arguments type. And this is in the books, right? This is part of the lore that not every human is good in the books, and many humans fell to Sauron's influence. And it was brilliant of the series to not tell you straight away, oh, these humans are being under the control of Sauron. No, it was something that developed through season 1, which was great. So I mention it as the origins of Mordor in episode 1 because that's what it eventually became, right? In episode 2, what I loved the most was another building block they used in the series, not only to create drama but to deepen these characters, which I call relationships. This is another storyline that expanded throughout season 1 and mostly in season 2, which was Gandalf's story. We know that now that the cold stranger was Gandalf, and what they started introducing between Elrond and Durin Fourth, right? The relationship between Eregion and Casa Doom, it's heavily implied everywhere in the books. But the fact that they chose to base this relationship in a friendship, I thought it was lovely. Plus, everybody plays their part like greatly. Greatly, you can say that, right? Yeah. So the actors are great, and the proposed relationships are also great, and are, to me, are deeply in canon, in the spectrum of canon. Back then, I mean, we already not know, but who didn't suspected that this stranger was Gandalf? Like it was like so obvious, right? But the fact that they used this part of the series to talk about the relationship that made Gandalf who he was, that's a risky situation. We already know Gandalf, like we all know Gandalf. We all love Gandalf. But there's one mystery about Gandalf that it's even mentioned in the books later. Like, what is his love for hobbits? Why does he care so much about hobbits? Why was he the only one that paid attention to hobbits? And the writers of Rings of Power decided that that was a building block worth exploring. And that is a building block that I would love to see explored. Not only the origins of Gandalf, but the origins of hobbits themselves. And we all know that hobbits were the most important thing for Tolkien. So in episode 2, which I called the episode about the relationships, introducing these ideas, introducing these characters, it's great. Again, inside the spectrum of canon, well played, well showed, perfect. In episode 3, what I liked the most was the obvious thing that they try to add here, and this is a point that it's constantly coming when I think about the series, which is Numenor, the island of humans between Middle Earth and Valinor, right? And I think Numenor throughout season 1 and season 2 has always been in kind of like a second plane of the narrative. It has never been the star. I think it's my instincts told me it's gonna be the star in like the upcoming seasons or something. But anyways, they use Numenor because they had to, because it's a key player in this era of Middle Earth. But they use it to highlight a couple of important things. First of all, is the beginning of the conflict in Numenor. They knew that there was a moment in time which is really rich in conflict. This one they didn't need to invent. It was there. It came out naturally. It was the big schism in Numenor, and eventually Al Pharazôn's coup d'état, right, against Tarmiriel, and they are all there, and they begin putting these seeds in. And again, this is an element of the history of Numenor that part of me always wanted to see. I always wanted to see it. So between what happens in Numenor and between what is happening with Sauron, uh, at this moment he's calling himself like Halbrand or something. And I doubt anyone knew by episode 3, season 1 that he was Sauron. And like, but anyways, the other element that I not necessarily liked, but it's worth mentioning by this point of the season, is like one of the storylines is about the origin of the orcs. They introduce this character called Adar, who seems to be like the origin of orcs, and this one is a hot topic for some reason. People get really I don't know, like sensible with the origins of orcs. This is something that Tolkien never clearly stated in any of the official works. Like the origin of orcs is not like, okay, this is the origin of orcs. All we know is that Sauron cannot create life, can only corrupt, and we know that orcs probably came from another life form that was corrupted. And since they are old, most people assume that that life force that was corrupted, or life form, sorry, were elves, which is probably right. But the point to me is that I don't really mind this. I don't really care about the origins of orcs, and it seems that the writers in the series were smart enough to not go that deep into it. Later in the series, you see some little like slivers of orc society, which is strange. It's strange, but again, let's go back to the main big argument. It doesn't break any canon to me. So even if they had an origin of society and they were like somewhat civilized, it's still right to think, or it's still under canon to think that they eventually were all corrupted by Sauron and they just became servants. That's it. So the series right here it starts showing its wiseness. Isn't that an expression? But how wise it is to not overstep the boundaries. They didn't make like big, dramatic, individualistic orcs. No. Like they gave them some sort of self worth, but they are misshapen forms of life. So they never crossed that boundary of like making like a hero orc or something. They didn't do it. So it's okay. In episode 4, which I call the episode of the Palantir, I think that there's one sort of mechanical issue that it's bringing Galadriel and let's just call him Sauron to Numenor. It feels strange. It definitely feels strange. But I think that overall, the lore of Numenor between the episode 3 and 4, it's really well made. And there's a lot of, let's say, criticism that it's related to Numenorians' design, armor-wise and everything. But I think the focus of this episode and what I liked about it was that it's not really relevant whether Galadriel is there or not. You see, like they were there because mechanics of narration of the series, but the main conflict in Numenor was still there. You know, like the influence, like the genesis of the faithful Numenorians versus the unfaithful Numenorians. It's all there, and that lore is really well portrayed. So it's still under canon and it works. Yeah, it could be that Galadriel being there was a little bit too much, but it doesn't break the objective of the episode or the series at this point, which of course works. In episode 5, which I call the Mithril episode, we already start seeing a little bit more of, like, how can you say it? Like there's a conflict in the elven world that I already said at the beginning that was something that I accepted, that I even embrace. By now, you really embrace it because they have to deal with with what you wanna say, like a conflict, like a true conflict, because you have the big civilizations of dwarves and the big civilizations of elves, and they are interacting in a point of time where they are at their peak, right? At the peak of their influence, powers, whatever you want to call it. So my point in this episode, and the point that I see that it might take this conflict beyond the spectrum of the lore that I set up for myself at the beginning, is that I think that perhaps the corruption of the dwarf civilization is a little bit too fast. It's a little bit too fast, and you don't really get to enjoy the dwarves in the peak of their civilization. But by episode 5, they have already introduced something that not overrides this corruption, but it makes it seeing it more enjoyable, which is the expansion of dwarven culture. This is one of the things that it's completely outside the spectrum of the lore. This is something completely new. It's something completely made up, but I think they nailed it. Again, the biggest props I can give to these writers is their capacity of knowing when to stop. So you have dwarves. They have like what do they call it? The mountain speakers, and you have female dwarves, and you have them talking, having like a marital relationship, talking about their families, having dinner, talking casually about like everything they did to sort of expand dwarves was great. They weren't the protagonists, so they didn't go that deep into them, but it works. The limits they put into the conflict of the elf factions between themselves and the corruptions on the dwarves and how they relate between Eregion and Khazad Dûm, the relationship they created there, I think it's great. Its limits are really clear, and it's really enjoyable how they do it. In episode 6, it's the episode I call the Udun factor. So, in episode 6, we already start seeing sort of like the latter end, the third half, the climax of season 1. It's already revealed that it's gonna be the origin story for Mordor, which I thought it was great. I had to straight up say it here. Like, if somebody wouldn't be up to the idea to see the origin of Mordor, you have hated everything to this point. But my idea on it, my take on it, is that the origin of Mordor, this is again something completely made up. For me it was acceptable because of two things. One, because it made sense with Sauron's plot inside the series, and two, because it had to do with orcs and the corruption of people, of humans. You know, it's like it makes sense. Basically, this is something completely out of the lore or the canon spectrum, but it makes sense. It makes sense. It's creative, and it's smartly done throughout whatever the characters are doing. So you have these foundational elements that we know are part of Mordor: corruption, dark magic, and it's all there. And the fact that Sauron has made this from the outside is just great. So eventually, when they reveal this Halbred, Hagrid, whatever character to be Sauron, and every piece of the puzzle to this point makes sense, it's just great. Because that is how Sauron acts. He's Sauron the Deceiver. He just plants seeds of, let's say, on Adar to make him believe he's the boss and to make him corrupt those lands. He plants seeds in the humans lacking for power and representation. It's all him. And we know he eventually wants to conquer Middle Earth, but we know he doesn't have the power at that point. So it's great. It's great how they did it, and revealing this as being the main point of season 1 was great. So we move to the end part, the last two episodes. In episode 7, that I call the Weirdos episode, we get another point of contention of season 1 and probably the whole series, which is how Gandalf's story gets a little bit crazy. Here is one of the things that almost goes beyond this spectrum of lore that I have mentioned throughout the episode. This whole ghost things, and them like saying that he's Sauron for some weird reason. These ghost characters, these white wraiths or something, and making him doubt, it's a little bit too much, and I didn't like it that much. But they made sense in the sense that they needed to challenge Gandalf. It makes sense somehow that if this study were sent to Middle Earth to fight against Sauron, the base idea of them having to learn why, it makes sense. We know that the Blue Wizards, they never fulfill their duty. We know that Radagast and Saruman, they went their separate ways. Saruman eventually became the more corrupted. So we know that Gandalf or Olorin was the only one of the Istari that eventually settled to do his work. But you never thought about the idea of what inspired them to do this work. They are not gods nor Valars in that sense. So they weren't put in Middle Earth immediately with everything ready to let's go, okay, let's go. They had to be inspired to do their job. And this inspiration is what justifies that some of them did not do their job. So seeing an opposed force trying to corrupt Gandalf, it makes sense. Even though it was made in a really weird and, as I said, not really pleasant manner, it's acceptable. Another weird thing is that you have Tarmiriel coming to Middle Earth, and that's okay. Numenorians having an interaction with Middle Earth, it's okay. But they try to really force feed you some elements of Numenorians that work. Some of them work and some of them don't. The one that works is Tarmiriel's backstory. It's a character that is barely mentioned in the books. All we know is that she gets overthrown by her cousin. So turning her into a character, I think was great. Creating the strife and creating the problems that gave her character, I think was great. Now, what wasn't that great was Isildur's part in it. Isildur's Elendil and the made-up sister character in season 1, they are not the best characters, but it's okay. Again, it's okay because it's not their time. It's still Miriel's and Numenor's, right? After Numenor's downfall, then it's their time, which it can be built in following seasons. But right now it's not their time. So introducing these adventures, Isildur, not only it's too soon, but this is something that is gonna bleed into season 2, which is this young Isildur. It's not well made. To me, it's probably the worst part of the series. So that's weird, but it's okay. And the other part of it, the other weird part, is of course I don't want to go that much into it because I think a lot of people wasted a lot of breath talking about the black elf and the love with a human. Is it too much? Yes, it is. Is it relevant? No, it is not. So another weird element of season 1, which probably one of the most talked among haters, it was that. Like, I don't really care for it. That's my point. By now, by 7 episodes, that they are like an hour and a half each or something, you have so much stuff in the series that out of all the weird things that happen, that one is just a footnote. It's just a footnote against everything great that is happening. So even though it's really easy to say like, oh, it would be a legendary relationship between humans and elves, how come it will never be mentioned later? Because it just happened and nobody noticed. That's it. These weren't like kings of elves or like kings of people. They were just there. So it's okay. Now, for episode 8, which I titled the Deception episode, we have the resolution of season 1 and everything. Of course, this is gonna be great because, as I've been mentioning throughout this discussion on season 1, the big idea of Sauron having like this incredible plan that came to fruition in the end and whatnot. It was great. Like, if only it was just that, it would made all of season 1 worth it. Because you realize everything is there for that reason. So one of the conclusions or like the big deceptions of season 1 was Gandalf being Sauron, right? Now you can see it as just a mechanical sort of resource to create more drama. That's fine, because as I said, the big reveal covers for that. And you can say, for example, like the Some people also argued about the relationship between Sauron and Galadriel. I never read a romantic subtext in it though. This is important. I read that a lot of people thought that they were writing a romantic interest in between them, but I think the writers were really careful there. They went for friendship over everything. They of course have a deep relationship by this point, which makes the reveal even more dramatic. That's why they did it. And I think everything is under an acceptable sort of measurement. It's acceptable because narratively speaking, it is strange. It is strange, and as I said at the beginning, like you gotta accept the this more vulnerable Galadriel in season 1, or even in the whole Rings of Power sort of over story arc overall. Like this is something that you gotta accept at the beginning. Vulnerable elves, and it's not bad that they are vulnerable, because even if you live forever, that doesn't mean that you never stop growing as a person, right? So it's great. The only thing that sort of also I not that I disliked about season 1, but the one thing that I thought it was a little bit rushed was the creation of the Rings of Power, the 3 rings of the elves at the end of season 1. Basically, to me, it's too ambiguous and it's too close. Like this is a point of danger, which after in season 2 we're gonna see why they did it like this. All we know is that Sauron never even touched the 3 rings of the elves. Perhaps it could be implied that he had a notion that they were created, but in the series he's way too close to it. And the way they create them, like out of almost fear, it's a little bit too soon. This point is the skittish, that's a word, right? Point of contention at the end of season 1. But again, as I said, the big Sauron reveal is what gives the whole season 1 sense, and it makes it so enjoyable. So, and then what are the big like conclusion points of overall of season 1? Making it the creation of Mordor and making it Sauron's plan. It was incredibly well made. It was crafty, it was deceptive, it was manipulative. Everybody is a victim of Sauron. That's perfect characterization for the main protagonist of season 1, which is without a doubt Sauron. It's great. The created plots, some of them are better than others, but they all fall into a good place. Gandalf, Eregion, and well, we have Celebrimbor later being stronger character in season 2, but he's already here. Tarmiriel and Al-Pharazôn in Numenor, the kingdom of the corruption of the men of the south, of that south, of course. They are all good. They are all good, and they all balance correctly in this sweet spot between doing too little and doing too much. Like as I said, Gandalf's weird ghost, they are like almost there, almost breaking. Like, who the fuck are these people and why do this so much power? That's another thing that's gonna come up later for season 2, like the expression of Gandalf's powers. The drama in the Dwarf Kingdom, it's also a little bit too fast, as I said, but it's has a good balance between the introduction of cultural elements of dwarves. Numenor is a little bit slow. The creation of like Elendil's daughter, and where the fuck is Anarion? I guess they didn't want to put Anarion in, so they could have like a woman and a male character maybe. I don't know, but that is a big thing that I think they won't forget in the future. Like, they can't not have Elendil and Isildur without Anarion, and it's just not gonna happen. And Of course, as I said, the more contested, created storyline, the relationship between elves and men in this part of the world. I think they intentionally did it to be relevant. So if you enjoy it, it's good. If you hate it, you can dismiss it. As I said, there's way too much stuff happening in the series. If the main focus of the series was this romantic relationship between this human and this elf, it would be a completely different subject. But it's not. And overall, the issue to me with many of these like contested elements, as I said, like the corruption of the dwarves, or perhaps the conflict between the elf factions. The problem is always that sometimes this drama and these tropes can be too standardized, they can be too normal, and this is something that's gonna come back for season 2 as well. When these tropes get too non-fantastic, when these characters lose their fantasy, they lose certainly some appeal. But as we go through to season 2, we know that the focus is on Sauron and the rings. So the magic is not lost. I think the series might be a little bit too big and the episodes might be too long, so that's why some people lose their focus. But the focus is there. The focus is there, and basically it's like if you don't have the capacity to accept adding this much drama to this mythos, that drama wise it was always this poetic sort of folkloric type of drama. If you don't have that, you're never gonna like this. So I think the main question remains already in between season 1 and heading into season 2. It's like, are you gonna accept this fact, this proposal? You gotta make a choice now at this point. Are you accepting this proposal? And if your answer is yes, I think there's so much to enjoy in season 1 of Rings of Power. So much. Probably the big thing that I agree that could be criticized, and something that I really share, is that some design choices doesn't seem that good, particularly in as armor goes. They did better armor in season 2, and this is just like not nitpicking, but perhaps and some design of the Harfoots and like the early hobbits, they are a little bit too, I don't know, too much shit on their head type of thing. So design wise, yeah, there might be some things that I agree with, but the end game and the, you could say, the first stepping stone they took for season 1 of Rings of Power, the first proposal, which was the creation of Mordor, worked great. And it gave the whole season just a satisfactory feeling of accomplishment. This big reveal at the end, it was super greatly made, and it made for just a great season 1, great enough to make you want to see season 2. And we are talking about, as I said, the creation of the Elven Rings at the end felt a little bit too fast, and that is sort of like the mindset that takes you to season 2. The rings are already a fact, they're already there, so you gotta deal with the rings. And what is gonna be one of the main focuses, or focus is plural, right, of season 2? It's gonna be the rings. So let's no let's thank you for listening to my brief analysis of season 1 of Rings of Power, one that I enjoy greatly, and none of the things that were like a point of discussion or contention were so bad that made me dislike this because, as I said, the main maxim which I use to watch these things is this spectrum of the lore. If it's acceptable there, if it doesn't break anything, just it just adds things. So these things that are added can be good or can be bad. Even if they're bad, they're not gonna break the core, and if they're good, they're just gonna improve it. And at the end of the day, the books to me are like the Ten Commandments, like written in stone by God. They are unbreakable. So no matter how many things you add, you can't break them. That's why they are unbreakable. So, anyways, that's season 1. Let's see you all next episode for season 2. Much more Legendarium to talk and Lord of the Rings to discuss. Thank you, everyone. See you for season 2 of Rings of Power. Bye bye.